Welcome to Profess EMS, the podcast dedicated to educating, training, mentoring, and inspiring EMS educators and providers alike. Whether you're looking to grow as an educator or prosper as a provider, sit back, open those neural pathways, and let's get to it. All right, so take 498. Welcome back to this episode. With me, I have Alexis of the super fabulous 22 at the Lips podcast. So we decided that we wanted to get together and kind of collaborate on this one on the topic and the infamous phrase of those who can't do teach. So it's a very big pet peeve of mine that I feel like it's a phrase that really has no true foundation. So Alexis and I kind of a similar background, but in the opposite is why we decided to come here, where Alexis began in education and then went into EMS and is now getting the EMS education side of things, where I began on the EMS side and then transitioned into full-time education side. So Alexis, why don't you tell us a little bit about that background and the pathway that took you from education to paramedicine?
So it's a weird one. It's definitely not unique. I don't want to act like it's that, but like it is a full 180 going from I'm teaching high school English, middle school English for a few months, and then I, long story short, very much on a whim, I just decided I didn't want to teach anymore. So I quite literally quit in the first hour of the entire school day. Didn't have a plan B because like my entire degree is in English. What am I going to do with that besides teach? I don't want to do that. Started doing caregiving. One thing led to another, and I thought I wanted to be a nurse, but I was going to go ahead and get my EMT so I can have it in my back pocket. Realized that the fear of getting dirty and gross is not as great as the job itself is. So, because literally I was like, "Ah, that looks so gross and dirty, ew." Um, Definitely not that attitude anymore. Still sometimes, as we all know, it's still, ew, gross, dirty.
Right,
But,
but teaching around a bunch of middle schoolers isn't dirty. I mean, I have a teenager at home. I know how teenagers are, so just as dirty.
still all the same smells, all the same smells.
Fair, yeah, fair.
So, yeah, I quite literally did a full 180 of an entire career, and here I am now. I like it still. I'm definitely at a point where I'd much rather be in a classroom than in the back of the ambulance any day. And I used to think, full transparency, that like anybody that went from the ambulance, from running the streets to teaching the classroom was a cop out. And
Mm.
I've very quickly learned it's not. It doesn't mean you can't handle the streets. It doesn't mean that you're not made for running calls and stuff. It's a different, I don't know, like a different, not even just atmosphere, but like experience in this job. It's a whole different setup, and I like it a lot more.
So where do you think that phrase even, really originates from? I mean, do you think that there is any true roots into it that it really has any kind of bearing or relevancy?
I'm glad you asked. I come with data. So
Oh, wow.
so it was actually Charles H. Mayo, who is one of the founders, of the Mayo Clinic. He said, "The safest thing for a patient is to be in the hands of a man involved in teaching medicine. In order to be a teacher of medicine, the doctor must always be a student." I personally, and am not going to argue with Charles H. Mayo of the Mayo Clinic, so like
Oh,
I'm going to take his word for it. No, I more so centered in this field. Anytime you think of an EMS instructor, it's not the same everywhere, but I feel like people have 2 categories in their head. Either it's the medic that should have retired 50 years ago. They don't look like they could even try to run a call, and they're doing this because they can't get back on the ambulance, and this is all they've ever done. So, like,
mm,
they're just gonna keel over at the desk one day. I don't know. All the little EMT students are gonna go run a code on their instructor. It happens. Um, Or we have the other flip of the coin of somebody who they're book smart and on tests they do great, and the scenarios in the classroom they do great, but then like when it comes to push comes to shove, they just can't hack it in the field. So they go back to what is safe and comfortable and what they're great at. And it's so much more than that. In our educator systems and stuff, especially now, it's becoming so much more than that that I don't know. I feel like people use that phrase, "Those who can't do teach." It's the ones who they can't fully grasp it. Because in order to teach something, you have to have that base principle and foundational skills. That's why you
Absolutely.
don't have like math teachers trying to teach English. You don't have, you know, EMRs trying to teach a paramedic class. It doesn't work that way. Same thing with doctors aren't going to teach paramedic classes. It's a whole different spectrum.
Right.
So I feel like people clown that phrase, but in reality, it's so much more than just you're just teaching. You are for me, it was kinda like looking around at who's the next generation of EMS providers that we're spitting out. "Oh, I don't like that. What can I do in my part to make this better?" Fingers crossed. Um, that's my 2 cents, and there's a lot more that goes into it, but in a nutshell.
Yeah, I definitely share that because one thing that I found is there is in EMS anymore. There's not people knocking down the front door to get into the field as a whole, especially in the education side of things, right? So, I mean, I'm gonna give you an example. Before I came here, I was a program director of a very successful paramedic program, and then after I left, it was just like a continual leapfrog game of them trying to find a replacement. And I'm not meaning that as like nobody could fill my shoes or anything, but there just wasn't applicants, right? I mean, it's went on to where they've had to really try to recater the whole job description because there just weren't a lot of people wanting that position to be, full-time faculty at a community college. And also not a lot of people that met the credentials either. But I mean, I still work as I dabble in everything as everybody in EMS does. And I'm affiliated with a local training center that does fire rescue, EMS instruction, everything. And they're all the time begging for people. It's like, hey, we have a request for a class, and there's just not a ton of instructors out there. And kind of a twofold thing in that I think that um one, just not a lot of people are wanting to get into that because we're in this weird pivotal thing, right? That where I think some people used to get into education because it inevitably it paid a little better because you were the subject matter expert, if you will.
Mhm.
And the fundamental things of education is they were really getting the best of the best to teach. But then it kind of got to a point where the education salary and the field salary had quite a disparity, and now they were getting closer to where even in the field, the field providers are now going past the educators. And going back to that, higher academia program, some of these places now are. I mean, I'll be whole honesty, like money is a big aspect of it, but I left that field because I couldn't get a pay raise. And it was to a point where EMS, post COVID was getting these pay raises and students straight out of the program were making more money than a program director with a master's degree and, over a
Ouch.
decade of experience. And it's like, what the heck? Like, and that's not what it's all about in education. I mean, I love the position of education, but still at some point you're like, hey, I'd kind of like to have maybe a little bit more. Times are tough. Inflation is a bitch. And, a couple more quarters in my pocket would help a whole lot. Right.
Right. Because
And
also if you're teaching, you're spitting out all those students. So, like, you're
yeah,
welcome for all of these students. Can I
right.
have
I
a
mean, it's,
slice?
I mean, and that's the thing. I think that on the sidebar of that, like the education is so underappreciated of the amount of work that goes into doing good education, right? I mean, there's difference between instructors, right? An instructor like, hey, here's a thumb drive with a PowerPoint presentation on it. Go forth and read all the bullet
Mhm.
points. And then there's educators, right, that are really building curriculum of really like doing research and really advocating for the industry. And it's a lot. And you got to have that certain type of like intrinsic motivation to want to do that too. But, and to back on the topic of the supply and demand is, I think we're kind of gotten to a point where like nobody's wanting to teach that. I mean, you can even see that in higher education, emergency services training, high school teachers. Like, there's just a national shortage of teachers that nobody wants to do because it's not that appealing. Because you get so many other more constraints on it now. Back in my day and earlier days, there wasn't as many hoops to jump through, if you will, and it's a timely process to get vetted to become credentialed to be an educator. Where before it was like, how long you been on the job? Cool.
Congrats, you're hired.
2 years. Here you go. You're now our training officer, right? Um,
That's so
and I mean,
accurate.
and in full transparency of how some of these things play out too. When I became that paramedic program director, how long do you think I've been a paramedic?
Oh, man. I wanna say years plural, but it scares me, so
9 months. I had been a paramedic for 9 months when I began being transitioned into the program director of the cohort that I had recently graduated from. Right.
you were
And the
just a
reason,
fetus.
right. So even when I took in the job, I was like, all right, I'm just going to be in the administration role. Then, like, once, getting in the process, they're like, no, you need to teach 12 credit hours a semester. I was like, of what? They're like, I mean, paramedic program. I'm like, I can, the ink is still wet on my card. Like, it's crazy. But again, at that point, there wasn't, you know, people having to meet the credentials for accreditation to be a program director. Not a lot of paramedics with higher degrees. And at that point, I had a bachelor's degree. And so they're like, hey, you're the only person we know can do this. So we're going to name you the interim director. It's like, oh, okay. Like, what's that mean? Right. And then even when time went on and the interim title dropped, whenever they opened it, and basically in a semi national search, if you will, it was me and one other applicant that met all the credentials. Right. And there's just not a lot of them out there. I mean, even at my fire department job, I'm the training officer there, and it's a competitive thing. It's a promotion. It's a pay raise, and it's just not a lot of people were interested in that, right? Because like off shift, I work 4 times harder as the training officer than I did as a shift officer. Just hey, come in, do your chores, wait for calls, run calls, do all those things, and then in the training side, it's just so much more administrative duties. Right. So I think maybe that's kind of where we're into that shift is there's just nobody who wants to do it. And so maybe, I mean, I guess this kind of sounds bad on me from the positions that I've been in, but maybe we're just scraping the bottom and we're getting all that we can. So maybe we're in search for that quantity and there's not really that quality because nobody wants to do it and they got to put somebody in that position.
I think it also goes to like how EMS, especially today, it is such a high turnover, depending on the agency you're at, depending on the step of the ladder of your career success, if you're starting from the very beginning or you're trying to move up. But turnover is so high that we're not having those providers who have been doing this for eons and eons. And, some of them, they went into education because they didn't get the supervisor position and they're
Yeah.
just not fit to be on the truck. But with the high rate of turnover of providers, and then you got to account for also by the time somebody is, I don't know, I feel like in a, I don't want to say a stronger academic world, but like in other areas of academia, by the time somebody actually has the credentials and experience to be able to teach, they're already on step two or they're doing something else. They don't want to teach. And it's hard. It is a very hard thing because it's not just like you pointed out, it's not just you have these PowerPoints, here you go, learn this, we'll have a quiz Friday, pass registry at the end. It's so much more than that that actually teaches the concepts, because if you don't get it, you can't teach it. And then
Right.
by my one of the many reasons why I try to teach best I can, is because like when you're teaching somebody else something, not only are you having to apply all of the different dynamics and styles of learning, because somebody learns with the auditory, but like me, I am way too visual. I have to see it. If I don't see it, it doesn't make sense. So you have to hit all of the aspects of who learns which way. How do I make this dynamic for everybody? And then, especially in EMS, adding in the real world aspects. And I'm not talking like every class is a war story. Nobody wants all that. I think it's appropriate to add them in. I know when I was going through school, I loved it because you hear about all of these different procedures and I don't know, interventions, things you can do, but like, when am I going to use this? Um, and I think that's really important. But I don't know. I think it really does have to do with just a high turnover. We're not having people who are it's rare, in my opinion, it's rare to meet the people that they've been doing EMS more than 10 years. And when you find them, you try to cling on to them because, like, that's a whole lot of experience. They may not still be the
Yeah.
best they can be over time, but I mean, they have the experience. A lot of
Oh,
this job is learning by mistakes, training to do better. Another reason you teach, you have to be up to date in all of the info and all of the data and all the statistics because the book is going to say one thing, registry is going to test for XYZ, but let's be so for real. Let's go over real world what we're going to do on the streets. So that's what I like.
yeah, wholeheartedly. And it goes back to the fact of to be an educator, you have to be on top of your game, no doubt about it. And that's one thing I like about education is it's something that kind of creates that motivation for me to want to be better because you get to the point where you're involved in it, and then you're the person people start coming to for guidance, outside of the class. Like I legit have had people call me and like, hey, what's going on? Like, I need your help. I'm a FaceTime you. And they FaceTime me like, what is this? And it's on the monitor. I'm like, you're on a call? Like, what? And like
Guilty.
yeah, people have called me in the middle of calls and like reviewing stuff and like asking for feedback. And it puts some weight on your shoulders and you feel that pressure. Like, I can't, I mean, not saying that I feel like that I need to be on edge in case, my friend calls me at 4 a.m. and, asks me how to, you know, diagnose over the phone, Addison's crisis or something crazy. But,
That's a
you do
great
have to,
question. Google
yeah,
says.
you have to be on your game with it. And, like one thing with Master Medics that really challenges me and I really enjoy is the tutor sessions that we do. I just log in and one on one with somebody for 30 to 40 minutes, and it is free reign to ask whatever. And, the membership that those students expect me to be able to answer all of their questions about anything. Right. And it's hard, but it's also like very riveting to like be challenged at that. And knowing things outside the book of like what's relevant, what has passed. You think, shoot, publishing a book, we look at these things like HA updates coming out every 5 years, the NAMT books being updates every 2 to 3 years. It takes that long to make a book, but how fast does medicine change?
Much
Right. I
faster.
mean, yeah, evidence based medicine exceeds publication wholeheartedly. So that's why you get so many generalities in books, if you will. I mean, yeah, physiology, pathophysiology, that stuff all stays the same basically. But when it comes time to like dosing or interventions or, hey, you know, earlier, like early in my paramedic career, they're like, hey, we've got this drug called Levofed and it killed everybody, leave them dead, Levofed. And like, it's terrible. You should never
Oh
give it. Now it's back. It's
no.
like, oh, Norepi, look at you. We save everybody with this. It is a great drug. And, back in early in my paramedic career, it was, you've got to know dopamine. It will save
I
everybody.
couldn't even if I tried to tell you dosing right now, if I can't pull out my cheat sheet, I'm cooked. It's the end.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Dopamine. It just blood pressure problems, dopamine, kidney problems, dopamine, urine output problems,
Ah,
dopamine, neurogenic
oh
shock,
no.
dopamine, bad gas mileage, dopamine. And And now it's just like, ew, dopamine, gross. Like it has lost
It's
all
trash.
of attraction, right? But it's still in some of these books that are in curriculums. But hey, if you aren't that good educator, you're not going to be aware that there's a whole lot of evidence-based medicine that suggests dopamine is not the right answer,
Yeah.
right? And that's where, registry and, all these other, certification bodies come into play of, or, registry in the US and Copper and all the other entities and my northern friends. But, when they go and write these questions, they're not writing it pulled out of, a Brady book or a JB learning book or what the NAMT books say. It's like, what is the evidence-based medicine? What is the most current practices? And that's what you have to adapt to.
And it's I think it's equally as difficult with all of the other things combined, but like you have your students who they go on their clinicals, they're doing their ride times, you're having class, and then they're coming back and they're saying, well, my medic said this, that, and the other. And you look at them and you're like, why would they say that? Don't do that. And they're like, well, that's what they said. Don't learn the bad mistakes. But it's hard to not know what the bad mistakes are if you don't know it is a bad thing.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. It, and there has to be some experience, right? So even, like early in my EMS education, it's like, it was dumped in my lap that I had to teach things and it was hard, right? So, if I was teaching say paramedic refresher classes or something, right? I would always intentionally try to put myself in like the basic, most remedial things. Like I'm going to be in charge of reviewing where to put a 12 lead on, right? And the chest decompression, hey, this guy over here has been a paramedic as long as I've been alive. They're going to do the chest decompression station. I'm going to teach you how to put on bandages and this is a this is an upside down C collar and like the very basic things because I
here's
didn't
how
know like
you establish an OPA,
right.
everybody.
And you gotta have some street cred, right? And like one thing that like helps me now as well, being around for a little bit, it's like all these gray hairs, right? So all these gray hairs just make me seem much more knowledgeable because like that guy's been around for a while. I bet he
He
knows things.
looks like he's been stressed.
Yeah, like you're gonna have a full head of gray hair. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm 21 years old. I've been a paramedic for 3 years.
It's been
I run
85
on nicotine and
years.
caffeine and cheap gas station food. So
I know a glizzy hate to see me coming. Um, no, but like I don't know, I just feel like people trash that phrase and trash the entire education field. But like also on the flip end, if you're ridiculing somebody who has the effort and time, if hopefully they're good, but like they're putting in the work to do things and to change our future generations of EMS providers. If you're ridiculing that, like please go have a seat. Go sit down. Like, bless you, question mark.
let's cough.
Oh, gross. Anyways, I just feel like it's just such an unnecessary criticism. And granted, you know, I will say it is applicable. Like some people they shouldn't be in front of a classroom, but it's like you said, there's a shortage. Literally, we're doing what we can with what we have. So I
And I think if even people get put in those tough spots, right? If they can be cognizant to realize that I have to teach a class and that they're self-aware that I'm not even that great at this, right? So if they can just be humble about it, but I think that that's maybe is where some of that phrase does grab traction is some people like I'm an instructor now, and they get this like holier than thou thing. I mean, paramedics are already bad enough about that as it is. Like I'm a paramedic, like you, what could you
Mhm.
do, right? That people are like I'm an instructor. I did. I'm a CPR instructor. I did my online class. I didn't put fast forward through any of the instructor development stuff. And the person that did my instructor monitoring 100% made me teach all 8 hours of CPR, and they really helped
Okay.
me through it. Right? We know those
Okay.
processes, and we know that they become kinda lax in things, again, because there's such a demand for it, right?
Mhm.
I think people get in there like, I'm an instructor now, that they got some type of special award, but inevitably some of those times it's like you've drawn out you won the 50-50 raffle, right? You had a name and a hat and they pulled your number. And it doesn't make you an entrepreneur because you just won more money, right? You just were the
Mhm.
unluck or luck of the draw. So I think if an instructor can get in there, they're put in that tough spot, right? That, hey, we need somebody to get in here to make sure these classes are happening. Get in here, facilitate some education, facilitate discussion, utilize your resources, and make some things happen rather than get in there and be like, listen to me, do as I say. I think that's where it gets it, that they find that hard slope, that they're put into a precarious situation and they think they have to be a dominant figure. Where I mean, and instructors are to facilitate education. That's it.
Right. Um, I think another good mark of an instructor is, again, touching back on, like, you don't just flip the PowerPoint and stuff like that, but also, like, not just teaching the information for the students to be able to take the test, not pri prime example for one that, like, a big teaching revelation, epiphany, I don't know what you wanna call it. Um, I was listening to podcasts, and they started talking about pelvic binders, and so, like, I know the gist of what it is. Where I work at now, we carry them. I used to not carry them, and, hopefully I never have to use it, but also, like, man, it'll be super cool now. But, and just like the general, like, why would we use a pelvic binder? Versus in this podcast, they're talking about, oh, well, yeah, you're actually more likely to have a pelvic injury than you are like a cervical neck injury. So, like,
Mhm.
if we have our high mechanism trauma calls, we'll just go ahead and put a pelvic binder on if they're hypotensive, because that's probably where it's coming from. And granted, I have not done the research to back that up. I haven't looked at the data, studies, this, that, and the other, but like, that makes sense. And it's getting these big, hairy, scary things of, like, even as far as, like, intubations and stuff. Like, if you really boil down to it, it's kind of a scary thing. It's
Yeah.
it's a very scary thing. It's for everybody involved, the patient, you, I don't know, the patient's mama in the back corner, I don't know, whatever. But it's a big thing, but going and explaining to the students, like, you need to know where your landmarks are because blank. Why do we need to know the 10 steps of entitle verification and you're in the right spot in the Quran and all that stuff? It's the teaching of the why, not just here's the answer, here's what the test is gonna ask, go forth and conquer, but like the lasting things. When I was in paramedic school, our instructor, we did these intubation relay races. I don't understand why, but that's not the point. But it was fun. I mean, I'm gonna be so
Yeah.
cruel. It was fun. I'm too competitive. I got in like 3 different fights in the same class period. It's fine. But I still, in the back of my head, anytime I have my Mac in my left hand and I've got my ET tube and I'm looking in, I hear my paramedic instructor in the back of my head, "Get off the teeth, Alexis." So it's literally, I hear it, I'm go, "Oh, stop." But, like, it's those lasting things, and if you've never taught, you don't get it, but if you have taught, you get it. It's that moment when those things connect inside the student's head, and it's like you see the light bulb moment. I've seen it a few times, and I eat that up. It's my little bit of dopamine and serotonin that I get, and I just cling on to it. Hopefully, it happens again. But, I don't know, just being able to take what's inside your head and the experience you have and the confidence that you can do your job and just kinda pass a little bit of that to the next person. And then, I mean, hopefully you have a instructor that's good enough and you're teaching well enough that you're gonna produce people that are better than you, and that's ultimately the goal of every educator. I don't want paramedic students that I teach to go out and be carbon copies of me. Number 1, that's terrifying. Number 2, I don't want that. I want people that are gonna be better than me, and that's a big part of why we do education is, again, it sounds cliche, but, like, the next group that are gonna take up the reins of this field, because, like, I don't know about you, Ben, I'm not gonna be here for forever on this earth, let alone this job. I hope whoever's following behind is good. because it really EMS, like you hinted at earlier, medicine changes so fast, but EMS has not been around that long. And
Yeah.
even in like what 60 years, seven, however many, we've gone from driving around in hearses to an entire mobile ER and then some. And we can run with scissors. So
Yeah. Yeah. And you made a really good point of, and it got my mind going about, developing our young and instead of eating them, like to really help grow
mm,
and advocate the industry is to train and educate. And and I think a lot of people need to understand too that to be like a teacher or doesn't require that you have a credential in education, right? So I mean, one of the most fundamental things that creates stability in an agency is the field training officers, the mentors, whatever type of vernacular that you use. Those are the people that are training and educating and helping grow and overall just foster education within an agency. And they may or may not have any type of formal education or be credentialed as an instructor, but inevitably that's their job, right? And supervisors or like field officers or whatever type of language the agency is using, somebody who's put in charge to oversee people in the field, right? One of their most basic fundamental duties is training. And and I'll go back to the fire side of things, right? So everybody's heard of NFPA. Well, NFPA says that to be a level one company officer, that you have to have a level one formal level one instructor course because that's the fundamental job as an initial company officer is to train and educate. That it's not to go and do all the heroic things and boss people around it. You get in that first supervisor's role, your job is to help grow and foster the young people under you. Like that's hey, you were entry level and now that's your next step up. Well, it's a stepping stone. So foster and educate those below you. And as you go up, you're just going to keep pulling them up behind you and you just repeat that cycle. Right. And I think that, EMS could learn a lot from that. And that's a whole other sidebar of where the fire side can learn from EMS and EMS can learn from fireside is, there's not really those fundamental things saying that, this is a guideline or, recommendation or even, law and some other different aspects of what should occur within your agency. There's nothing really there for EMS specific. And so I think there should be some spillover in that for people to realize that once they get into a supervisory job, that is still their job is to help take care of their people below them from the leadership aspect and making sure that they have the knowledge and the skills to do their job effectively will inevitably it will not make their job worse in any shape, form, or fashion. It's only going to make things better to be better at your job.
no, absolutely. And that's I think just another hard thing about this job is you have EMR, if that's your thing. You have EMT, advanced EMT, if that's your thing. You have paramedic, supervisor, some kind of cushy office job, admin, QA, QI, whatever it is, instructors, and that's it. So, so I think that's it's also a hard place to be in because like if you don't want to get off the streets, well, you can balance your full-time job and teaching. That's hard. You can go be in super you can go be a supervisor. That's I have nothing but respect to all supervisors. I may not always agree with my supervisors, but like nothing but respect because babysitting grown adults is not my cup of tea. Anyways, um, but like realistically, unless you go flight medic, there's not many places to go forth and conquer. So, like, it's also hard because when you think about it, you either go in like a office management position or you teach. And what else are you going to do in EMS? I mean, there are different things you can do with your certifications and like your license levels, but grand scheme, you're you don't have many options. And so the people who either they don't know what to do next or they just get stuck in this for too long. And I don't know. I hate that those are the people that tunnel into the instructor pool, but also who else? I mean, we're pulling from our own people, and sometimes that's really hard,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely. It's
like the in-house agencies. So now not only do you know these people, and as far as like before they became instructors, and everybody knows that everybody talks about everybody else's calls. Mm, not gonna get on that soapbox, but, like, you're going into these classes, look at the instructor, and it's like, I know about that time you did XYZ. How am I supposed to learn from you? I bet I could have done it better." I hate that mentality, but same.
oh, hardly. And I think and going back to the thing of being self cognizant and realizing that you just because you're an instructor and somebody put some letters after your name, that it doesn't make you more apt to doing your job better. Right now, like the training and education and go with staying in training and education will make your job better. But and having that humility, right? I've had full disclosures at the beginning of my classes of of different things, right? So I'm like, hey, this is a time I made a mistake, because you have to teach that too, that you're gonna mess up. It's not if, it's just when. You will make mistakes. And granted, most people in emergency services, they have the best memory, so they will never let you forget that you messed up. So yeah, if you're teaching a topic like um, like I got in a pickle one time because we were in we'll call it a transition period in our state with ketamine administration, that I had went to these trainings where the state was discussing of not making ketamine be, calling medical command and getting orders. They're like, we're going to give you standing orders for it soon. That part hadn't happened yet. That was only in like subcommittees and discussions. And I gave somebody ketamine, never called medical command, never got orders. I mean, treated them appropriately. Nothing ill came of it.
Mhm.
It was the right treatment, the right thing. And yeah, I got my hand slapped by medical control. And yep, all the guys at work, anytime we'll bring up a scenario, like, all right, what's the dosing of ketamine? They're like, you tell us. And they just never forget, right? So yeah, that is always a running joke. If you mess up, you just got to embrace it, truly embrace the suck, because those who remember will never let you live it down. So you gotta have that kind of good joke too, where you can go make fun of yourself for screwing up, and teach about the lessons learned. So education, I've taught things like, hey, I always thought this to be true. I taught this, I preached it, and after experiencing it this way a few times, I withdraw my previous statement.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just like early on, like they're in a car wreck, you have to backboard them. Their back might be broken,
Oh,
they're going to be paralyzed. It's one of those things, like you kind of teach what you know and what you're taught to
mhm.
teach, if you will, and at the best understanding you can. But just like paramedicine, education is always revolving, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I
So-
I recently told our paramedic class because the the program that I help teach with has an affiliation with Master Your Medics. And so I was telling that like at the end of their paramedic school, before they go to testing, they get like all of the Master Your Medic stuff and like how incredible that is. And they're like, oh, we haven't even looked at it yet. I looked at them and said, what are you doing? Like, you are done with paramedic school in literally a month. Be so for real. And stressed this one girl out because she was like, "Should we be studying now?" I said, "I mean, I would." And then I stepped back. I said, "I am so sorry. That was entirely too much. I need to take a step back, but you should be studying, yes." But like I told them, they have so even like I went to paramedic school 4 years ago. Whoa. But when I went, there's still so many more resources now than just 4 years ago,
oh,
and that's
absolutely.
that is not a long time. I mean, my body feels like and my brain feels like it's been a really long time. It has not, and there's already so much more. So, like, realistically, with these students, I told them, I said, with all due respect, you don't really have many excuses because pull out your phone, type in whatever question you have, do some research and digging, and voila. But, like, I mean, me too, though. That's my search history at 2 o'clock in the morning while I'm on shift. What is occipital?
Like, how do you pronounce? Mine is a lot of times of Google. How do you pronounce this word?
I'm typing in meds because I don't wanna ask the patient again and wake him up to ask him what medication it was. So I'm like, azithro azithro wait, how to spell penicillin. But, but no, it just I ju I get disappointed when I hear people say, "Oh, those who can't do teach," because like, no, it's not easy. I mean, I don't know. Me, myself, and I, where I'm at in my career, I would much rather be in a classroom than on the ambulance. Did I think I would be at this point 4 years ago? Absolutely not. If you would have told me a couple of years ago, like, "Hey, I know you just got your medic, but, like, one day you're not gonna wanna be on the ambulance," I would think I'm having, like, an entire fever dream, like, there's no way. But things evolve and things change. Personally, I'm not ready to completely leave the field yet. I just wanna venture into a new avenue because my back hurts from being bumped around on an ambulance.
Fair, fair. All right. So, what do you? So, we'll do some like closing discussions here. So,
Yeah.
just rapid fire. Why do you think people don't want to be an instructor?
I think they don't want the responsibility. I truly believe that teaching is a gift that some people have and some people don't. Just quite point blank. Some people aren't made to teach, and that's fine. Not everybody is. I'm not the best teacher in the whole wide world, but with humility and understanding of like, I don't really know the answer. Here's what I do know. We'll fill in the blanks as we go along. Um, I don't know. I think some people don't teach because they just can't. They can't hack it.
Fair.
Not trying to sound prideful, but, like,
Yeah. So, what do you think? I have my opinions on this, but what do you think? Somebody who gets put into that role, and people saying that, well, those who can't do teach. How do you think a teacher educator overcomes that stigma?
oh. Um, it's very much not an overnight thing. Um, even I was listening to podcasts and they were talking about, like, when you're that new person in your agency, you wanna go in and impress and wow everybody, but it's not gonna be as soon as you're there, bending over backwards to make a good impression, all that stuff. It's gonna take time. People have to see consistency. They have to see the long-term results. So, like, if you are an instructor and, like, you're new into this, I still feel like I'm very new into the instruction aspect in EMS, but, like, you're not always gonna feel like you're ahead of the game. You're not always gonna feel like you have enough knowledge to teach your students. And when you hear that, it hurts, but, like, just know that you're the one putting in the time. You're the one putting in the effort and the patience to make a difference. So you have that next student that hopefully they last for more than 5 years in this field. No guarantees, but fingers crossed, it'd be cool.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. Like, I think you just have to keep going. I mean, I think it comes a point where you just keep going. You do the absolute best you can. You have that humility, and you find that passion and desire to be good at everything that you do. Right. So even if you're like, hey, I've got a back injury, I can't be on the ambulance anymore, and this is all I can really do. Be good at what you're gonna do.
Mhm.
Right. You get to that point where, hey, I'm limited in this, or this is kind of my bread and butter, what the position I've been into. Hey, you've been selected to do QA, QI, you're put in a public information officer spot, whatever. Be the best you can at it and just keep trying to go, and keep advancing. So, like
Mhm.
from my aspect as an educator, I try to, attend all these conferences, just absorb education. And ultimately, my goal is I want to surround myself with people much smarter than me. That's it. I never want to be at a spot where I'm the smartest person in the room. You don't grow that way by, showboating yourself. So, I mean, arrogantly, can I say that, yeah, there's times I'm the smartest person in the room? Yeah. But is that where I want to frequent my time? No, absolutely not. I like to go and be humbled and have good, thorough discussions and network myself with people much smarter than me that I can reach out to. It's like, hey, if I don't know this, I will find out. So I've got a little niche of network of people who are physicians and PAs and nurse practitioners and people I can go and check in and want to be like, hey, I have no idea what this means. You help me out. So trying to rely outside of Google and find people who got some, good found a oh my gosh, words are hard. Some good foundational experience and education. And again, just put myself in rooms with people much smarter than me. And I think that's really what helps us grow.
And I mean, it what is that cheesy phrase? You can't grow where you're comfortable, or growth comes from uncomfortable places. I mean, same with instruction. Like, I have my different categories, or what are the different topics, I guess you could say that, like,
Mhm.
that's my niche. That's where I thrive. That's the area I love teaching. I love explaining this. Like, it all is beautiful. I can explain it great, but then ask me to explain med math and I shrivel up and die. Um,
Yeah.
instruction is 98% of the time, it's not comfortable. And it's not that you're doing it because, and this is how it should be, you're not doing it because it's a cushy little spot. You just, look at a couple of papers, watch some scenarios that the students do, click some check boxes or whatever. It's so much more than that. And like you had said, you have these students who can come up with questions that I've never even considered. I've never even thought about that. And I mean, you have the humility aspect that you should have of, I'm going to be honest, I don't know the answer, but we're going to look it up.
Mhm.
We're going to figure it out and we're going to go from there. So having to be a person with authority and experience and knowledge and all of the information they need, and instructing to where the students understand and grasp it, while also knowing that you don't know what you're doing all the time. It's it's very
Yeah.
uncomfortable, but I don't know. It Once you get the knack for it, once you do the thing and you see how students grasp and you see how, God, things even years later, like, I'll go to the one of the weeks where we teach, and we'll be going over something and I'm like, "Oh my god, it never made sense until now. I just didn't want to tell anybody."
Yeah. 100% been there. It's like a decade later, the light bulb just came on. Right.
Oh, this is the Krebs
Yeah.
cycle. Ha ha.
Yeah. Oh, that's how you pronounce that word. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and and with that humility thing too, I think as an educator, just I don't say stay in your lane because that's another phrase that I don't like, but kind of know that maybe your lane does have some bumpers up, like the bowling alley. Like I mean, I've been asked to come to places and teach things on like traumatic brain injuries just because I'm like probably because I'm one concussion away from a leather helmet. And I think that's why, like that, and some like airway stuff, and like an educator stuff, and I feel great in that. But guess what? Nobody's ever asked me to come teach about obstetrics, because that's just not my thing, right? I'll
Fair.
find you somebody. I got some connections, um,
Go
and
see what's
not
puppy.
trying to just think that your instructor certification gives you a crown. Like we're going through some training at work, and there's refreshers and kind of in servicing on surgical crikes. I asked my doctor friends, like, will you come please teach us? It's very much imposter syndrome if I'm in there like, hey, Ben's going to teach us about surgical crikes today. And I'm like, hey, I know that this is the sharp side of the scalpel. And
I'd be
there's
up
probably going
there.
to be
I'm
some,
looking for my hill, valley hill, and then we're at the
yeah,
spot. It's lights
like, I
away.
know it's the little hole, not the big hole. I got to cut one way and stick my finger in it. and then something else is supposed to happen. I'm not real sure. Like, yeah, I've been around some cool people who've went through it in training, but I think that is more well suited for somebody else, right?
Mhm. No, absolutely. Um, I think another thing to note is that, like, I've heard people talking about, as far as like higher education and the academic world and stuff, like the opportunity for EMS to have a seat at the table of these big discussions with like fellow, not really fellow, but like RNs and doctors, and like having, letting us have a caveat in all of that, letting us be in the decision making process because we're still in the realm of patient care. We're the starting point. But I mean, when you have these people that, for all intent and purposes, they're not, they don't have the right credentials, they don't have the right, I don't know, mindset to be able to teach, it doesn't help anything. It doesn't help the stigma of, oh, well, you're an EMT. It only took you six months to get that, or like 3 months,
Yeah.
whatever it is. It only took you 3 months. But if you have people that they have the right background, they have the experience, they have the education, things are structured with an educational mindset and in the students being able to critically think for themselves, we can get away from that stigma. And I, that's something I would like to see. It's just, it's not just another 3 month program or a year program, but we have the stuff to back it up. Not just research and data, but like showing that we have the value. We not, being a paramedic right now may not indicate that I have to have an associate degree, but with the paramedic school I went through, I can have an associate degree from what I, my studies and stuff. So like making it make sense and making it matter. I don't know if that made sense, but like,
Yeah. I think one of the other big stigmas to end, and I think this is where a lot of it's hard for instructors to get clout, if you will, is that infamous thing like, well, you haven't been doing this long enough. Right? Like, I've been doing this for 20 years. Well, congratulations, Papaw. You've repeated your rookie year 20 times. Okay. So just because it's you've put on, a uniform for 20 years does not mean that it's been a progressive 20 years. And we
yeah,
keep a lot of that mindset, right? That you have to have so much tenure to get clout and respect. And that kind of goes back to the thing I was saying about like the gray hairs. Like, well, he's been around the block for a little bit. You can tell. Right there that does that have some value? Yes, absolutely. Is it the total weight of everything? No. I mean, it's and it goes back to the podcast that earlier on I talked of when it's like, well, you should be an EMT for so long before you become a paramedic. Well, no, like to be a successful paramedic, there's nothing really that signifies that there's any value in that. Do you have to have good fundamental knowledge? Absolutely. But does it mean that just because you've been doing it for so long that it's finally going to click? Absolutely not. Right. I know some people who, year one, year two, are a far better paramedic than some people I know who've been a paramedic for 20 years. Right? Because the education, let's face it, the education a paramedic got 20 years ago is nowhere near the education that they get now or near the requirements. So if you're still sticking to the same education and knowledge as you had 20 years ago, a brand new paramedic is gonna blow you away. So, and I
yeah,
think that there's that thing like, well, I don't want to be shown up. I don't want to be shown up. Like, I don't, especially like I like having. I mean, I'm an alpha personality. I'm gonna be honest. Like, I don't want to be showing up and somebody to be, a new person to show me up and know something I didn't. Because like, whoa, no way, no way. There's no way that you know something that I don't. But it happens, right? I
yeah.
helped teach a class at the local paramedic program this weekend, and a student asked me something about like we're talking about yeah, like the use of mannitol in crush injury, and I'm like, I mean, well,
That's a great
and
question.
yeah, like, and they brought up some things just like their question to understand, like, you know what, like I've never and just like sidebar conversation with some of these students. I'm like, man, that's impressive that you're there. And not that like saying it's impressive they knew something I didn't, but just that it's cool that they're brain is on such a pathway that mine never would have been halfway through a paramedic program. No way. Right. So it's just one of those things. Like I've been just completely blown away by some paramedics like that. Right. Like let's say prime example in that class this weekend, there was a scenario of, this patient, a very extremist, we'll say. And, these paramedic students have only been in this program for, 5 months. And they're like, oh, well, this patient, they need RSI. And I'm like, all right, we'll go for it. Like, if you want to get that brassy about doing it, like, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. So do it. And two paramedic students are absolutely crushed the process RSI. I'm like, holy crap. Like,
Okay.
kudos to you all.
Okay.
Like, that's, but again, like, it's just different. Every person's different. They're going to hit different paces at different times. But again, just because you don't have so much experience does not really give you the clout that you should deserve. You're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm a 25-year, retiree from something. Like, cool. You worked at an agency for 25 years that ran 72 calls a year. Cool. So,
Exactly.
and I've found that like a lot of times if people want to just give that clout of like how long they've been doing it or what their rank are, like,
That ain't
I
it.
mean, really,
That's
really,
not
people who have
everything.
good clout, they don't bring up those topics.
Mhm.
They just do it and show it.
Um, oh man, I heard somebody say one time, those it was something to that extent of like, if you have the right to brag about it, you're not gonna brag about it. Something like that. It just that's
Yeah.
what it meant. But um, oh, I was gonna add something. Rip. Oh, damn it. I don't know. It was something. It was in the back of my head. It's gone now. R.I.P.
Squirrel.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh well.
All right. Yeah.
Anyways.
So I think we've said a lot of cliche things, and I think at this point we've beat that horse to death. But yeah, but in closing, I think the biggest remarks and my personal takeaways is stop saying silly things. Yes, yeah, there are instructors out there who are better educators than they are providers, and there are people out who are far better providers than they are educators. And
Mm.
two wrongs don't make a right. Um, but four lefts possibly could. Um, anyways, yeah. So I don't know. Just stop saying silly things, people. There are great educators out there who get an education for the right reasons, and they're trying. Just help them. And sometimes, if you feel like they're doing the wrong things, and you are that senior person, hey, if you're a non-official educator, doesn't mean you still can't give your 2 cents and help the educators along, right? So it's all about growing the industry and helping everybody be better than you are.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, everybody. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next time. Say bye, Alexis.
Bye, everybody.